We filed an amicus brief recently with the Supreme Court with our frequent partners in these enterprises, the Allied Educational Foundation, to take on Utah's efforts to suppress the grassroots. And how is this being done? Now, Utah is a conservative state, but there's an establishment in Utah like there is all over the country. And those of you who are conservative or liberal will be interested in this, because the establishment in both political parties doesn't like the grassroots. They don't like to be told what to do by regular citizens and voters and party activists who put blood, sweat, and tears into the efforts to shape political parties, their views on policy, and their candidates. And so in places like Utah, they don't like the idea, for instance, of what had been the typical way of electing candidates or nominating candidates for public office, which was party conventions. And as we highlight in our amicus brief, the GOP had until recently a nominating convention or caucus process for putting forward candidates. Until 2014, GOP party members meeting in neighborhood and local caucuses elected delegates to represent them at the party nominating convention, which then selected candidates to appear on the general election ballot. And that changed when the Utah legislature enacted what is called SB 54, which required the Republican Party to conduct primary elections. Now, the establishment hates caucuses. They hate nominating conventions because that means that regular folks can be more involved in selecting candidates than through party primaries, where who you know and having a lot of money is the best way to win a primary election. But with caucuses and nominating conventions, grassroots conservatives can have an outsized impact on the potential candidate for office that the party puts forward. Now, the party establishment doesn't like that because it results in too much in the way of conservative candidates. And on the Democratic side, I would presume the same ethic is at issue. They don't like liberal activists being able to have an outside influence, and they get candidates they think can't win in general elections. Now, so what was the answer? Because the legislature, rather than persuade the fellow party members, hey, we need to change the way we select candidates, they used the power of government to suppress their right to association, a constitutional right. And as we highlight, because the 10th Circuit upheld this challenge to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a challenge to this power grab by Utah State Legislature. We said if allowed to stand, the 10th Circuit's decision will significantly degrade the associational rights of political parties. The result is contrary to Supreme Court precedent. As the 10th Circuit majority acknowledged, the Utah legislature, I need to get my glasses here so I can read it, adopted SB 54. That adopted SB 54 is comprised of overwhelming Republican majorities in both the State House and the State Senate. In other words, members of the Utah Republican Party who could not convince fellow members to adopt the changes incorporated in SB 54 reconvened as legislators, voted their preferences into law, and in this way compelled their fellow members to accept these changes. The rationale offered for this party coup was remarkably thin. You know, we talk about Alexis de Tocqueville, who's the famous French observer of American political life in the early part of our country's history. As Alexis de Tocqueville discerned almost 180 years ago, free political associations are particularly important in a democratic system like ours, where the tendency is for individuals to go their own separate ways. As he foresaw, governments will tend to view private political associations as enemies and will try to restrict their freedom. And we respectfully submit that the court plays a vital role in defending these institutions from needless government encroachments and intrusions, as what is being imposed on the Republican Party in Utah. You know, and as I point out, the power brokers in Utah, Republican, hate these nominating conventions because it allows grassroots conservatives to have an outsized say in the potential nominees to their party. So this is the sort of work that I love that Judicial Watch is able to do. We take on the establishment not only here in Washington, but in states like Utah that is trying to suppress you, the American people, from being able to express their views at the grassroots. And it just doesn't mean necessarily that it's the federal government doing this. It doesn't mean that it's liberals doing this. My guess is all the Republicans who voted for this in Utah are very conservative. But remember, they've got these institutional issues where they don't want regular voters upending the system there and influencing the system in a way they don't like. And thankfully, the Constitution protects the rights of political parties, which is not necessarily, people hear political parties and they think corruption. No, political parties are an example of the greatness of our constitutional system, which allows you to gather together with other Americans as a fundamental right to freedom of association, to come up with a system of government or a system of allowing candidates to prosper. That's what political parties are about. They allow you to affect your values through a freedom of association to get candidates of your choice into elected office. And as we point out, the big government, the establishment hates vibrant political parties. That's why the left doesn't like political fundraising, and these good government types don't like political fundraising because that allows political parties to prosper. They don't like money being spent outside the government. So when you see suppression of political fundraising, when you see suppression of political parties and the vibrancy of political parties, when you see suppression of political parties being able to appear on ballots where you have certain states where they have no political party affiliations listed on the ballots, that goes against the American grain, and it goes against our constitutional system, in my view. So the Supreme Court's considering this. We hope it takes it up, and so that's what Judicial Watch does. We highlight these specific government corruption issues, these suppression issues, and let's see what happens with the Supreme Court. Will they take the side of the Constitution, or will they take the side of the political establishment in Utah? We'll see.